Greetings, my friends. Number one moment here. Let me mute this phone real quickly so we are not interrupted. And we're going to do, or I am going to read to you, chapter 2 from the Shakespeare Stealer by Gary Blackwood. So, here we go. Last time we met Widge, and he was working for the doctor, Dr. Bright, and he was very, very interested in traveling the world. So let's see what happens in chapter 2. When I was 14, the grand climacteric struck again, and my fortunes took a turn that made me actually long for the safety and security of the Brights' home. In March, a stranger paid a visit to the rectory, but it was not some gentleman come to claim me as his heir. He was, in fact, no gentleman at all. The doctor and I were in the apothecary when the housekeeper showed the stranger in. Though dark was almost upon us, we had not yet lighted the rushlights. The frugal doctor put that off as long as possible. The flickering flames of a pitch-pot threw wavering, grotesque shadows upon the walls. The stranger stood just inside the doorway, motionless and silent. He might have been taken for one of the shadows, or for some spectral figure, death or the devil, come to claim one of us. He was well over average height. A long dark cloak of coarse fabric masked all his clothing save his high-heeled leather boots. He kept the hood of the cloak pulled forward, and it cast his face in shadow. The only feature I could make out was an unruly black beard which curled over his collar. A bulge under the left side of his cloak hinted at some concealed object. A rapier, I guessed. We all stood a long moment in silence, broken only by the sound of the potion boiling over its pot of flame. Dr. Bright blinked rapidly as if coming awake, and snatched the clay vessel from the flame with a pair of tongs. Then he turned to the cloaked figure and said with forced heartiness, "Now then, how may I save you, sir?" The stranger stepped forward and reached under his cloak for the rapier, I feared. But instead he drew out a small book, bound in red leather. When he spoke, his voice was deep and hollow-sounding, befitting a spectre. "This is yours, is it not?" Hesitantly, the doctor moved nearer and glanced at the volume. "Why, yes, it is." I recognized it as well now. It was one of the small editions Dr. Bright had printed up the year before, with the abundant title, Charactery, an art of short, swift, and secret writing. "Does it work?" "I beg your pardon?" "The system," said the man irritably. "Does it work?" "Of course it works," Dr. Bright replied indignantly. "With my system, one may without effort transcribe the written or the spoken word." "How long does it take?" the man interrupted. Dr. Bright blinked at him. "Why, as I was about to say, one may set down a speech as rapidly as it is spoken." The man gestured impatiently as if waving the doctor's words aside. "How long to learn it?" The doctor glanced at me and cleared his throat. "Well, that depends on the aptitude of the—" "How long?" The doctor shrugged. 2 months, perhaps more. Perhaps a lot more, I thought. The stranger flung the book onto the trestle table, which held the doctor's equipment. A glass vessel fell to the floor and shattered. "Now see here," Dr. Bright began, but the man had turned away, his long cloak swirling so violently that the flame in the pitch-pot guttered and smoked. He stood facing away a moment, as if deep in thought. I busied myself cleaning up the broken beaker, content for once to be a lowly prentice with no hand in this business. The black-bearded stranger turned back, his face still shadowed and unreadable. "How many have you taught the system of yours?" "Let me see. There's my boy Widge here, and then—" "How many?" "Well, one, actually." The hooded countenance turned on me. "How well has he learned it?" Dr. Bright assumed his false heartiness again. "Oh, perfectly," he said, to my surprise. He had never before allowed that I was anything more than adequate. "Show me," the man said, whether to me or the doctor I could not tell. I stood holding the shards of glass in my hand. "Are you quite deaf?" the doctor demanded. "The gentleman wishes a demonstration of your skill." I set the glass in a heap on the table, then picked up my small table book and plumbago pencil. "What must I write?" "Write this," the stranger said. "I hereby convey to the bearer of this paper the services of my former apprentice." The man paused. "Go on," I said. "I'll keep up with you." I was so intent on transcribing correctly and speedily that I paid no attention to the sense of the words. "Your name?" the man said. "Eh?" "What is your name?" "It's Widge," the doctor answered for me, then laughed nervously, as if suddenly aware of how odd was the name he had been calling me for 7 years. The stranger did not share his amusement. "My former apprentice, Widge, in consideration of which I have accepted the amount of £10 sterling." He paused again, and I looked up. For some reason, Dr. Bright was staring open-mouthed, seemingly struck dumb. "Is that all?" I asked. The man held out an unexpectedly soft and well-manicured hand. "Let me see it." I handed him the table book. He turned it toward the light. "You've copied down every word." I could not see the expression on his face, but I fancied his voice held a hint of surprise. "Aye." He thrust the table book back into my hand. "Read it back to me." To the unschooled eye, the scribbles would have been wholly mysterious and indecipherable. Yet I read it back to him without pause, and this time I was struck by the import of the words. Does this mean—" I looked to Dr. Bright for an explanation, but he avoided my gaze. "Copy it out now in normal hand," the stranger said. "But I—" "Go on," the doctor snapped. "Do as he says." It was useless to protest. What feeble objection of mine could carry the weight of £10 of currency? I doubted the doctor earned that much in a year. Swallowing hard, I copied out the message in my best hand, as slowly as I reasonably might. Meantime, my brain raced, searching for some way to avoid being handed over to this cold and menacing stranger. Whatever the miseries of my life with the Brights, they were at least familiar miseries. To go off with this man was to be dragged into the unknown. A part of me longed for new places, new experiences, but a larger part clung to the security of the familiar, as a sailor cast adrift might cling fast to any rock, no matter how small or barren. Briefly, I considered fleeing, but that was pointless. Even if I could escape them, where would I go? At last, I came to the end of the message and gave it up to Dr. Bright, who appended his signature and then stood folding the paper carefully. I knew him well enough to know that he was waiting to see the color of the man's money. In truth, I suppose I knew him better than I knew anyone in the world. It was a sad thought, and even sadder to think that after 7 years, he could just hand me over to someone he had never before met, someone whose name he did not know, someone whose face he had never even seen. The stranger drew out a leather pouch and shook 10 gold sovereigns from it onto the table. As he bent nearer the light of the pitch pot, I caught my first glimpse of his features. Dark, heavy brows met at the bridge of a long, hooked nose. On his left cheek, an ugly raised scar ran all the way from the corner of his eye to the depths of his dark beard. I must have gasped at the sight of it, for he turned toward me, throwing his face into shadow again. He thrust the signed paper into the wallet at his belt, revealing for an instant the ornate handle of his rapier. "If you have anything to take along, you'd best fetch it now, boy." It took even less time to gather up my belongings than it had for my life to be signed away. All I owned was the small dagger I used for eating, a linen tunic, and woolen stockings I wore only on the Sabbath, a worn leather wallet containing money received each year on the anniversary of my birth, or as near as it could be determined, and an ill-fitting sheepskin doublet handed down from Dr. Bright's son. It was little enough to show for 14 years on this earth. Yet, all in all, I was more fortunate than many of my fellow orphans. Those who were unsound of mind or body were still at the orphanage. Others had died there. I tied up my possessions with a length of cord and returned to where the men waited. Dr. Bright fidgeted with the sovereigns as though worried that they might be taken back. The stranger stood as still and silent as a figure of carved wood. When he moved, it was to take me roughly by the arm and usher me toward the door. "Keep a close eye on him now," the doctor called after us. I thought it was his way of expressing concern for my welfare. Then he added, "He can be sluggish if you don't stir him from time to time with a stick." The stranger pushed me out the front door and closed it behind him. A thin rain began to fall. I hunched my shoulders against it and looked about for a wagon or carriage. There was none, only a single horse at the snubbing post. The stranger untied the animal and swung into the saddle. "I've only the one mount. You'll have to walk." He pulled the horse's head about and started off down the road. I lingered a moment and turned to look back at the rectory. The windows were lighted now against the gathering dark. I half hoped someone from the household might be watching my departure and might wish me Godspeed, and I could bid farewell and return before I left this place behind forever. There was no one, only the placid tabby cat, gazing at me from under the shelter of the eaves. "God buy you," then I told the cat, and slinging my bundle over my shoulder, turned and hurried off after my new master. And that's the end of chapter 2. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his shalom.